Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 113. Thanks so much for joining me. Today's conversation is the type of exchange I just love. It's filled with value for the listeners of this podcast, but also there are a few surprising turns and insights, not only for the guest, but for the host as well. I'm joined today by Jill Thiry, a former publishing executive turned content and activity coordinator for a spa in Mexico. The kind of midlife transformation I just love to explore. Jill is also the founder of Club Change, a virtual accountability group that helps you align your intentions with your practices to create a meaningful life in a supportive community. The theme of Jill's work is enhancing lives, one tiny step at a time. Here's what we cover. The convergence of significant events that sparked her midlife transformation. Working with the question, who do you want to be when this pandemic ends? How the mantra, wing it, invited the opportunity to create Club Change. Why the combination of intentions and habits is so powerful to create change. And how to help those who are change weary or change wary. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Jill shares some of the things that are lighting her up these days. And as always, I'll put links to those items in the show notes, along with Jill's website, where you can find out more information on Club Change. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Jill, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's an honor to be here, Kathy. Thank you for inviting me.
So please share a bit about who you are and what you do.
I love this question. I lead Club Changes. I teach fitness, chant, and intention setting at a spa called Rancho La Puerta. I am an intensely impassioned person about bringing future intentions, whether they be breath, movement, or achievement-oriented, into people's present practices.
And I know that you went through quite a transformative process about 20 years ago. Can you share a bit about that?
I can, and I did. And 20 years ago was 2002, and the year before that had been a pretty big event on the globe, which was 9/11. And at the time, I was managing for business-to-business technology magazines in different vertical industries. And it impacted the financial services industry. Was in my vertical bunch, and it was already in a kind of tough place. And then when 9/11 occurred, it was an even tougher place. So that was the year where I had risen to upper middle management. And 20 years ago, after managing all of those through that, after a 15-year very successful career, I was laid off for the first time in my life. I was paid to not work. And I was just like, well, that was back in the days where they did give you really nice packages. So I was freed. I was liberated from something I'd worked since I was 14 years old. So it was a new time. And in that new time, I choose to make some pretty drastic new yeses in my life and some new nos. And one of those was also ending my marriage at that point in time and taking care of some healthcare. And part of that process was going to Rancho La Puerta. Like a friend said, what are you doing for the holidays? I said, I don't know what I am doing, but I do know what I'm not doing, which is anything that I'd ever done before for the holidays. I'd been together with my ex, now late husband for 18 years. And so she was like, let's go to a spa. I was like, let's. So we did it for New Year's. So right now is actually my 20th anniversary of having to go to Rancho La Puerta. And that week was so new in my life that it started a practice, a more mindful practice of accepting new yeses in my life and new nos. And one of the other new yeses is my father and brothers did an annual boys' weekend, and they would get together and support each other through what I call tough love, because you really can't pull the wool over the eyes of your siblings and parents. And they were doing this for years. And that was the year that they opened it up to the whole family to say, does anybody else want to join? And they had some rules of engagement. And I jumped in because I realized at that point in time that I wanted community and support around changes that I wanted to move in. And it started me on this 20-year path of what I call being a professional student of change, no longer a professional student of making a ton of money, having the big car and the house and the white picket fence. And it's been just a glorious path and journey of not living in fear of change, but moving through it step by step. So I kind of joined with my brothers, and it's now called Family Retreat, not Boys Weekend, although I love that old name because I used it for a long time. And then my friends started practicing it because I was telling everybody how it was creating wonderful changes in my life. So my friends started doing that and started doing it with their kids, and it was working great with that. And then when I started working at the ranch, people started asking me for privates, and I decided I wanted to write a book to honor my father. And so then I started coaching people as I was writing the book, which is not yet done yet. So that's a whole nother story, but it just kept coming to me. And so now I'm doing it whenever I'm not working or teaching it at Rancho La Puerta and other things. I am spending time on my new business called Club Change, which also came to fruition at another big planetary shift time, which was the beginning of the pandemic. And I didn't even realize that until a couple of months ago. I was like, well, these big pivots, and I believe I've become a better practicer of being in the present moments and whatever it is versus what I wanted to be or what I think it should have been. I thrive on change. I think I always did a little bit, but now I really do. And spend a lot of time being in the truth of the present moment, which has allowed me to both pivot myself quickly and help others do that in a kind, loving way.
It's interesting that we always say from a manifestation standpoint, what you focus on is what you get, and your focus is on change. So you're bringing like massive change into your own life. But I want to go back to that 20 years ago. I mean, maybe you had an affinity for change, but most of us did not back then. And that event that you referenced really was the first time that we were forced to confront impermanence. We were forced to confront that the world is changing. And so I wonder the before and after a little bit of your life. You're going down this corporate road and everything in your life changes from your personal life to your professional life. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening inside during those times?
Oh, that's a really good question. Even prior to that event, I was a person who did change a lot, right? I had a lot of different careers, and even in the publishing career, now I was at the same company for 15, 20 years. We had lots of brands, lots of roles, lots of different locations, lots of different teams. So I really thrived in it. And publishing has a pretty low barrier to entry, so you could try a lot of new products. So I don't know if anything inside of me changed, other than I think the not having to work, believe it or not having to work to being laid off. And I collected unemployment for the first time and had a severance package. It was super liberating to just be in the moment. And I started to really listen to myself more, not to listen to others. So I think the biggest changes were, I've always loved change, but I learned how to be in it in a more kind and aware and self-loving way. And it took a lot of practice and a lot of bumping my nose against a lot of walls in order to learn that and kind of systemize it. But if I had to be perfectly honest, probably the big internal changes were community, right? So I suddenly had my brothers and father that I agreed that I would report to on an annual basis. And then I was like, okay, well, just doing this once a year isn't going to help me bring these new practices into my life. So I kind of created subsets of check-ins with friends and So I think what that was practice and acceptance and awareness. Wow, thank you for that good question.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful answer. It made my heart skip a beat when you said, this feeling of liberation that comes from the quiet. Like it was the first time that you actually had permission to stop and to listen and to see what was going on. And that is amazing, right? That's where the change comes. That's what we are trying to coach our clients and your students, your community members with, of, trying to listen to that inner voice. And it's funny how when we were both in the corporate world, you're just going, you're not listening.
Right.
You're on to the next thing.
You're competing, you're comparing, you are, which is all kind of a mental activity versus an external activity versus internal. And actually you bring up, I just have realized this too, the very first time I ever got super quiet was right out of college. I traveled backpack through Europe for a summer. And in that, I was hitchhiking for a while by myself. Remember, this was way, way, way more than 20 years ago. And I grew up in a family, I'm one of 6, and I'm in the middle. So there was always activity, always noise, always stuff going on. And all of a sudden I realized I had spent 2 days not speaking to one person. Like I was walking and camping, and I discovered that I was writing songs. And now here we come 40 years later, and I'm chanting and writing chants and leading choirs. And who would have thunk? It's amazing. And I'm just realizing this because I've never tied that together to listening to the quiet.
Yeah. It's funny because on some level, it almost feels like we know, but you just have to walk down that path to see what that really is. And that's just, what a lovely story. I love that. And the fact that being one of 6 kids and suddenly, did that unnerve you that suddenly you were in this quiet, or was it, oh, this is what I've been looking for?
You know what? When I think back, it really wasn't either. It was like an aha. It was like, oh, this is pretty interesting that in my journal, suddenly I'm writing music and singing to myself and creating little ditties. And one of the songs still comes to me. That journal ended up getting stolen in Belgium, sadly enough. But it's just interesting that I remember it. I remember the one song that I started singing to myself in cities by myself through Europe, kind of just making it on whatever.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything that you miss from your old corporate life?
Oh, I had the privilege of working with such great teams. I miss that. I do miss a little bit of the competitiveness and the brainstorming and the competing. So those are all innate things. And believe it or not, the busyness, which I don't crave. But there was, that was a time in my life when I was also super productive. I go back now and remember working full time and getting my MBA full time at night. And I look back now, I was like, how did I ever do that?
It was youth. But there was a rhythm to that busyness, the bright lights, big city. There was a rhythm to that we just kind of, I think, fell into. But I do think that the youthful energy helped us stay on that treadmill for as long as we did, right?
And speaking of youthful energy, I also miss the technology support. In the corporate world, especially covering high tech, I was in it. And when the internet was being born, I was in it, launching a magazine called Network Computing. So it was really fun. And so I missed that. And I used to think I was very good at tech. And now that I'm on my own, I'm like, oh, I am not very good at tech.
Yes. I've come to the same conclusion myself.
IT support, where are you?
Yeah, exactly. Who do I call? Oh, it's me, right? And so you've recently shifted once again. It sounds like the pandemic may have given you another opportunity. So can you talk a little bit about these last few years, what you were doing before and what that birthed?
Excellent question. And just realizing how I'm going to answer that is it was another point in time when I was furloughed for 5 months. So I've never tied that together. It's going to send me on a whole new course of income versus freedom exploration. But here I was, supposedly for 3 weeks, not able to go and teach and work at Rancho La Puerta. And I was back in the United States. I lived just south of San Diego. And I was chatting with my boss. And we were just like, okay, what are we going to do? And he's like, yeah, I just had this person ask me this great question. Who do I want to be at the end of this? And I was like, oh, of course, me. I grab onto that, love it. And I put notes of paper all over my condo. And that question just kept resonating. So, right again, listening to your soul, being in the quiet of my place, allowing myself to just explore. I just was like writing down these words until I was like, oh, I'm going to do my class for myself that I teach at the ranch at the beginning and end of guest visits. So I took my own class. I sat down and I ended up with a mantra, a one word, I netted it all into one word that I could practice speaking to myself. And it ended up being my mantra ended up being wing it for those 3 weeks. Now, those 3 weeks ended up being 5 months.
Right.
But at the beginning, it was 3 weeks. We were all planning, and I'm like, okay, the end of 3 weeks, so it's like wing it. I was like, oh, so for 3 weeks, I can learn Zoom and So I created 3 practices for myself and I just wung it and tried some new things and they worked. The ranch helped me offer it out to some guests and I just offered free services on Zoom and they took off. And at the end of that, I was like, okay, it's not a book. My vision of Boys Weekend to honor my father is not a book. It's a class. It's a club. And a friend of mine recommended, I was noodling names and she was like, Club Change, not Change Club, but Club Change, which worked great. And no one had it and I loved it. And so I did the trademark search. I was like, I'm on. So after that, I asked for some help creating a website because I certainly couldn't do the tech. And within 3 weeks, I had a website. I had started the classes. And I don't know exactly the timing, but I feel like, Kathy, it's not. So this has kind of been my aha, is as you envision and kind of focus on one word that's more about your intention, about being it, not aspiring to it, but bringing it into your present, you are emboldened to take small steps that actually practice it. And just like tennis or guitar or the corporate world or sales or whatever, practice brings it into our wheel well, or what I call our canyon. So that inspiration, and I taped it up all over my house and I just practiced it. And one step after another happened. And here we are 2 years later, and I'm running regular club changes every month and it's totally fun.
I love that question. Who do you want to be when this pandemic ends? And the strange thing about that is that we can still ask ourselves that question 2 years into this now, right? It's like we still have the opportunity while we're still in this unusual time in our lives to reimagine that. And have you reimagined that? So has that shifted? You thought it was 3 weeks, it turned into 5 months. And even though life resumed in some fashion, it's still a little start and stop. So do you find that you're reinventing yourself as you go along these last almost 2 years now?
Yes and no. So the process for me is the realization of sitting in the truth of the moment is that until we have global herd immunity, there is no new now. There is no new end that's out in the future. We are here. This is now. This is the way it is. This is the truth of the present moment. And it's not going to change in the near term, I don't believe. And so it's brought the practice more immediate, right? And it's brought the realization of, okay, this is the new world. If I want to travel internationally, this is now how I have to prepare for that and do that. And if I want to continue to work with people in public, here's the precautions and the choices. Here's the choices. Like this is what it's all come down to is being in choice. Here's the choices I can make for myself that have me feeling safe, happy, comfortable in my intense desire to share. So Zoom, technology has been such a blessing for me because I can share on Zoom and it's safe and it's sound and it's infinite potentially. But I do keep shifting up. Oh, wouldn't it be great to do this all live now? Like right here in my condo. And I'm not ready to go there yet. Right. So that's, I think, a moving target. Just like everything is a moving target as we just accept what is right now. And with part of that accepting right now being fully aware of what your intention or your map to the future is, but bringing it into the now. Because truly, this is all we have is this minute right now. I mean, we don't have tomorrow. We don't have next year. So when I practice that, it is quite liberating and doesn't get me all caught up in this kind of pandemic dialogue. It's just like, okay, this is the world. This is the world I live in right now. Here's the choices I can make.
I think what the pandemic has done is I see it as a light that's just shining. So these things that have always been there, suddenly they've been illuminated. So as an example, when you were talking about, you set an intention and then you take small steps. That is the way our life always operated, right? Think about if you're a first-time parent. You don't know how to be a mom or a dad, but suddenly you have this baby. What do? The next step, right? Or you start your corporate career. You have no idea how to go about things. What do? It's that first step. So I think there are things that when there's societal structure, you don't even think about it. But when that gets impacted, which I think has happened these last couple of years, suddenly it feels like you're out there on your own and these moments become so precious, but it always has been that way. We're just more attuned to it or maybe more sensitive to it. And so I think part of the birth of this practice for you, like the timing to help people work through that and to understand that timing is perfect. And my guess is that there was something about this that you needed, which is why it came to you. You needed to be able to remind yourself of that and then able to assist others as they can take these practices and start to make them some of their own. And one of the words that you've used a few times is the word intention. From your perspective, what are intentions and why do you prefer them over goals?
Let me just make one other observation before I answer that question,
Sure.
which is I had another aha, which so relates, and this is just recently to kind of societal structures. And it really kind of brings the difference in these two large global events from our perspective that impacted this. The pandemic is kind of a health and wellness thing. And your intentions for yourself tend to be something that improves your health and wellness. And I'm talking about wellness in a broad, balanced way, not, perfect physical health, right? But mental and community and all of the pillars of your life. And I realized the pandemic, individual health and wellness literally shut down all those societal structures, all of them almost. All the economic structures, all the physical structures, all processes as we knew them have changed. 20 years ago, some percentage of our processes changed. But this one, because it impacted us all individually and what we could do. So to me, that basically supported the universal intent that health and wellness and the aspiration of your personal health and wellness is a worthy priority to choose. And when you do prioritize that, you share that benefit with the world and those around you. And so it kind of does bring to goal or intention. I intend to be well is different than, and I'm kind of doing this on the fly, the goal of losing 10 pounds. So the intention is more the why and the emotional internal process or value structure. The goal or the objective or even the commitment or practices that I do is more the outward, the doing, the future result. And so I focus on intention, and I actually even bring that to a mantra because I have found that it is an important step in actually bringing change or intentions. I mean, these are intentions because intentions are maps to the future. They are something that are not in your practice. Otherwise, by definition, it wouldn't be an intention. Otherwise, by definition, it wouldn't be a goal or an objective, right? So this is, by definition, those words represent something that's not in your canyon. And that's canyon is the analogy that I use in Club Change. And mantras, I kind of switch intention and mantra because then you repeat a certain word that helps you bring that practice into your habitual doingness or thinkingness or speakingness. And in that practice, it helps you do your intention versus just think about your intention. It helps you be what you want to be right now because right now is all you have.
Yeah. As you were speaking, I guess this is just the aha moment podcast, but it was something that you said before you got into the intentions. And the image that came to mind is when we have a big event that impacts the globe, but not globally. So 9/11 could be one, maybe a hurricane or an earthquake, like a big event where that event happens feels it the most. And then these concentric circles kind of radiate out. And the way people are impacted is less and less as it goes out into the world. Everybody can feel it, everybody can empathize, but the impact is less. What we're experiencing this with the virus is that center is in each one of us. So there's 8 billion centers. That's what is making this so powerful, I think. And then as we're taking the responsibility to be able to say, okay, how do I keep myself well, as you say, holistically, mind, body, and spirit? What can I do? That has to be radiating out as well as we learn to care for ourselves in these times. So the work that you're doing is, again, so impactful.
Well, and you're right. This is the podcast of ahas, because part and parcel with that is you are the universe wrapped up in one, right? So then it becomes kind of a practice of, yes, it starts and ends with you. I mean, your view, your beliefs, the way you speak to yourself, the way you interact with all around you is universal. And the universe is in you.
Yeah. And going back to my previous point of shining the light, from a universal perspective, nothing has changed. It's always been that way. But we have not collectively stopped to be able to reflect on that and appreciate that. And then what the potential is, which is where we're talking the rest of the podcast, right? Of some of the things that you're doing and what we can do individually is what does that mean potentially and exponentially as we start to harness this energy that we didn't know what to do with, right? We were just running away from it and hiding ourselves. And now we're trying to say, okay, I'm accepting this is what life is. What is it that we can do now to care for, starting with myself, but then others as well, which comes back to your community?
Yeah, both community and the willingness and ability to learn your lessons. So what came to mind as you were saying that is one of my favorite phrases. You keep learning lessons until you learn them, and then you go on to the next lesson. And so I feel that that's so relevant to as we or as individuals learn to do that or share it or be it, we're going to stumble on the way. And part of practicing that is to not judge it then. So, okay, so last week when COVID was here, this is how I practiced it and did it. And this is what worked and didn't work. And how can I sit in that lesson in a non-judgmental way, which is, I think, the other big part of small, kind practices around a mantra that help you be whatever it is that you are inside and out, and not be fearful of bumping up against lessons along the way and letting them teach you until you're ready to move on to the next one.
Yeah. And it feels like there are people now that are awakening to this and are ready for it. But I also feel like there are people that are just change weary. They either feel like they want to avoid it too much or are just overwhelmed by it all. And I feel, it's particularly hard for folks that are on the front lines for sure, for parents and families with young kids and schools. And how do we, as people that are willing to incorporate some of these practices in our lives, how can we extend that out to relieve some of the pressure for others who don't have the ability to do some of these practices at this moment in time?
What comes to mind first and foremost is to be super kind to yourself and always to speak kindly to yourself internally, that internal dialogue, to say, I am, I will, and to be kind in whatever those practices is. So for me, it's and for the clubs, is to learn non-judgmentally and make it smaller until you do feel really great about whatever it is. So you're weary of change. It's the weariness. So what is it that's making the weariness? It's what you're saying about something around you that's repetitive. So can you look at that with a different eye and say, okay, this is going to keep repeating. How can I change my story about how I'm experiencing that in a kinder, smaller, tiny way? Can I stop and take a breath? Can I go take a walk? Can I sit and meditate for a few minutes? Can I go look at my favorite picture? I mean, anything to change the habitual response, which might be contributing to the weariness or the wariness, right? So the habitual response tends to, we end up carving ourselves into this little canyon that's very filled with gravity and super repetitive. And we're not even aware it's happening. It's in our subconscious. It's just, and it's all these beautiful life lessons that we've had and teachers and experiences. And it's great. And it's really easy to be there because it's comfortable and it's safe and it's carved and it's automatic. So to move in this new space is going to feel a little edgy. So you might choose to say, the first thing is to just be aware that you're wary or weary of change and just say that. Okay, right now, I'm really tired. I'm freaking tired of this. Being the truth of that is like the first step. I am, and I intend or aspire to this. So to change that language and to say, I am wary of change, to say possibly something like, I am willing to try this one little thing to not be weary. Or what's the opposite of weary is energized. And so instead of saying I'm weary and I'm really tired of this, saying I'm optimistic that I can try one new thing this week. So really breaking it down to a simple mantra and practice has been super successful in a lot of people moving through that comfortable place of judgment, of self-judgment and criticism and doingness, and helping kind of slowly but surely change the shape of that canyon to be filled with kindness and self-love and acceptance of what is, without the judgment, without the story, without all the adjectives, without all the negativity, with all of that, just to sit in it and then say, okay, is it true, first of all, or am I, in my own story? How can I make that simply a true statement and then reframe and practice? I believe the other thing is community and reaching out for help. So being willing to sit in your stuff and say, okay, I'm not perfect. And yes, I'm in fear just the process of saying that I am disinclined to do it. And then even noticing if you're struggling to find a kind enough staff to move you through that, to be honest with that and be willing to pick up the phone and call a friend and say, you know what? A couple of days ago, I was listening to Kathy and I tried this new practice and I thought it was going to be super easy. I thought wrong, like sit in that truth, sit in that lesson, and then say, can you help me think of something that's going to help me just take one baby step out of this current canyon? And I'm always shocked when I do that one, how humbling it is, and in a good way, right? Like not initially, like it's uncomfortable, it's gut wrenching, it's scary sometimes, but it's truthful and it's honest and it's human. And when we are okay with admitting that we are a human being and we are imperfect, we are perfect in our imperfection, and we are willing to ask for help and be in community, which I think at our animal nature, we are a herd tribe. I mean, we're pack animals. We're not isolated people, which I do think adds extra strain. So reaching out for help also forces you to say it out loud, which gets it out of spin, which is another kind of way to kind of come out of that canyon or reshape the canyon, is saying it to someone. And so we practice in the clubs. We say our mantra and we state our practices out loud. And we're willing to sit in whether we do them or not, and are willing to learn in a non-judgmental way.
I think the theme, if I can just stitch together the thoughts there, between self-compassion, asking for help, voicing it and speaking it out loud, these are all ways of softening that constriction that can happen when you're in that, I like you say, that canyon, feeling this gravity, and you're in this tense position, it feels like a way of just softening, even if it's around the edges a little bit. And with that softening comes expanse. The constriction eases. You can breathe a little bit, to your point, and maybe just taking a breathing practice. So I think that's wonderful advice for folks who are just in it and can't see a way out right now. Might be something as simple as giving themselves a little self-compassion, asking for a little advice, or just saying the words out loud and listening to them as a way to breathe a little bit easier and to begin to take those steps forward. So that was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for that synopsis. And the other thing that came to mind is just the simple noticing. I find if I can notice those physical triggers, right? That is just your body. The first symptom is, oh, my pulse is going up. The hair on the back of my neck is up. I am tense. Being with that and asking yourself honestly and curiously, why? What is that? For me, and club members, often just that process is so enlightening and freeing, because when you notice it versus just have it be automatic and be it, but when you notice that you are being it, you notice that that's the thought or the action, and you allow yourself to be there, I find that you can venture into a new way of processing that. And so if you notice it and can even say to it, so what we do a lot of times is we actually name it. So I call it an obstacle or a trigger, and to make it silly and fun and less scary is, we'll name it. Oh, here I am being busy again. What is it that I'm avoiding? Why is it, and you can kind of make fun of yourself, and it helps to be in that truthfulness then.
Absolutely. Yep. We're going to go through an exercise from Club Change, and we are going to get your details. But before we do that, is there anything else about the club that you'd like to share with listeners?
Oh, I've shared so much, and it's just happened completely naturally. We've hit all the kind of 8 steps, the process steps, which are showing up for yourself, thinking about it, writing it down. We didn't talk about writing it down, envisioning, practicing, tracking, and sharing. And so we talked about the tracking and sharing, which is the honesty part. Mm-hmm. No, I don't think there's anything else we can share other than it's fun and it works, and people keep coming back.
Excellent. Well, we'll get your contact info in a bit. Before we do, though, we like to wrap up with something we call a dose of inspiration, so our listeners can get a chance to know you a little bit. So let's start with a favorite wellness practice of yours. How do you keep yourself well?
Well, luckily, I work at a health and fitness resort half of every week that serves only pescatarian food, and I'm actually paid to hike and chant and teach swimming and lead intention setting classes. So I've manifested a life that helps me on that path. But I'm now doing it at home, and so part of my path of wellness is sharing my practices. So I'm realizing I don't care how many people come to my Zooms. Half of what I offer when you go to my website, I don't even charge for, because it keeps me in my happy place, which is sharing my practices. And my practices of wellness are to be kind to myself, to notice when I'm in my busyness and comparison. I have a morning practice of meditation and chanting, and I just finished my morning walk. I couldn't run this morning, but I go through gratitudes every time I'm out walking. I go through a couple of things that'll make my day great, so that my day by instant is quiet, in gratitude, and in intention, like where I can focus and clarify. So, and of course, I've set my intention for the new year, and it's called Uncluttered Clarity. This is my theme for the new year. And the more often I share it on podcasts, the more often I am being public and bringing it and manifesting it in my life. So,
And you're talking to a coach, so I'm going to keep you accountable.
Great.
Now that you've said it.
That is a big part of it. And so moving, breathing, practicing what I preach is a wellness practice for me. And so I love sharing it, and I love doing it. And I notice when I don't, which is so amazing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. What have you read or listened to lately that you enjoyed?
I am loving The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. I'm doing a lot of meditation reading. I just got certified a 200-hour certification in yoga too. So I'm reading a book called Heart Yoga, which I'm enjoying, the tie into spirituality, into the practices. Yeah, I'm a true believer in lifelong learning. I mean, my guilty pleasure is napping and reading. It's like, that's a delicious day when I've had an opportunity to nap and read.
That's a wellness practice in itself right there.
Exactly.
What new thing or experience are you looking forward to trying?
Oh, this is so exciting. I've just packed a suitcase. I am flying down to Puerto Vallarta and doing a 4-day learn how to surf retreat.
Wow, nice.
I've lived in California for over 30 years and I've lived close to the coast. So I'm doing a retreat. I'm over 60 and I'm going to try and learn how to surf.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Good for you. I can't wait to hear how that goes. This might be part of it, but envision your perfect road trip. Where would you go? What would you do?
Oh, now my perfect road trip has no timeline and no destination. My perfect road trip is getting in my SUV with a sleeping bag and a tent and a cooler and just going and being wherever I am for as long as I want, and then moving on to the next place when I'm ready.
That sounds perfect to me. What has you feeling inspired these days? What's lighting you up?
Well, doing podcasts, this is pretty new for me. And it's the beginning of the year. So I've been super busy and launching a lot of clubs because people do tie intentions and club change with the New Year's. So I'm super lit up by the number of return club members I have coming into the new year. And that's excited, and getting other people excited. So that club change lights me up. And then my newest practices, which are listening to that quiet. So that quiet listening side it's lighting me up because I am practicing it more every day, or at least noticing when I'm not practicing it and journaling on it. It's lighting me up because it's a really hard practice and lesson for me. And it's a lifelong lesson. And it's in my heart of heart, core of core, a way to continue to demonstrate more compassion and more kindness to myself and to others by just being quieter and a better listener.
I got the chills when you said that. So for whatever that's worth, there was some truth in there. Lastly, what has you optimistic about the future?
Oh, the human being at our core. We are a herd. We are kind. We are all loving. So if we allow ourselves to simply know that everyone else is just a lovely human being as well, not better or worse or right or wrong, or no matter where they live, what they believe, what they do, I'm very optimistic that we will learn from this difficult, judgmental time that loving other people is really what it's all about. And you have to start with yourself.
Hear, 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 hear. So I'm sure our listeners would want to get in touch. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, the best way is to go to my website, which is jillthiry.com, JILLTHIRY.com. And I have all of my practices on there and a bio, and people can sign up for classes, and then they'll get on my email list and get reminders. Once they sign up for something, I've got regular reminders for the weekly practices. And then I do have a Facebook too, and it's Facebook/Club Change Now will bring you to our public Club Change site too.
Perfect. Oh, Jill, what an enlightening conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kathy. It's been just totally delightful.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.